Welcome everyone to a new episode of JKL Media Talks Genres. Today we're going to be talking about a graphic novel slash miniseries called Identity Crisis from DC. It involves pretty much all of the main heroes. It has cameos from some other like second tier heroes, and there is a reason I picked this. Lou was asking earlier, and he said, I'll wait until we talk about it to ask. I'm going to go ahead and say it now. There is a big reason I picked this. There are goalposts in the comic book arena. One of them would be like Crisis on Infinite Earths. It essentially rebooted DC and the DC heroes. And it kind of set into motion the multiverse theories and all that stuff, made possible like Flash going to a time where, Batman was actually Bruce's father and all that, Flashpoint. So in this case, Identity Crisis was literally an identity crisis of the DC superheroes. It went on to spawn things like Infinite Crisis, which was another goalpost type setting. It started the 52 era, which was one comic a week for 52 weeks, which was why it was called 52. Fairly iconic. It also almost rebooted the JLA to what the core members were. It started integrating some of the members of like Legion and the Titans. They became more of a tighter group instead of being all offshoots of each other. And it started this whole renaissance of we're all in this together, and we've gone through a lot of really traumatic stuff, and now we are set on this path to make sure that things are set right before the bad things happen. This was, when it came out, a big deal. And it is also controversial. I will say that right up front. The misogyny is real in this miniseries. If you overlook that, though, I feel like the story is very noir, very, I don't know, I feel like it's emotional. And while it is set up to be a murder mystery, I think that is almost not the case here. I think the central theme is, what do we do to each other when pressed, essentially? And, we see that the good guys have clay feet. So I feel like this is a turning point in making our heroes real. So I want to get first thoughts from both of you. I'll start with Lou. I know Lou has some issues with reading comic books, so.
Well, one of the problems with podcasting is when you come across something that you're not in love with, that your friends are in love with, you don't want to come in and just stamp all over their memories, feelings, and whatnot about a project. So I will try not to be too brutal in my
I'm okay with
assessment of this. As Karen mentioned, I haven't really been into comics for quite a while. It's just something that I grew away with. And it's not because I look down upon it or anything like that. It's just from a storytelling perspective, comics take a long time to get their story done because they're released in installments, and because there's so little story in each issue, I just wasn't satisfied. I'd rather read a real story, and use my imagination and to do the comic book counterpart of the story I'm reading. So I haven't been into comics for a long time, and this was a tough pick for me on several fronts. One, because the cast of characters is so humongous. And while I know the principal players, there was a lot of characters in here. I had no clue who they were. And we just the other big issue I had with this, and we discussed this before off air a while back, is the flow of conversational bubbles in these comics is very hard to parse out at times. So I would constantly be doing starting reading, because I would read the bubbles out of sequence. And I said, no, that doesn't make sense. Let me read it again. Okay, now it makes sense. So that just takes you out of the story. And this happened consistently. And a lot of times they like to carry a sentence over into the next bubble. So then that also breaks the flow as well for me. And your comic book readers out there are probably just shaking your heads and saying, oh my God, this guy's hopeless. But I just can only report how I experienced the story, and it was very stop and start for me because of that. And then on a storytelling perspective, I didn't know whose story this was because there were so many characters and it kept jumping around POVs. The closest I got to it was Green Arrow's story, but he was just sort of the plot device guy for this. So I didn't really know who am I supposed to be following here? And so that was also confusing for me. And then just on an artistic level, I just found some of the drawings not up to snuff, to be honest. Especially large audience crowd scenes. I realize it's very difficult in a comic book format to do those kinds of scenes, but I found it very jarring. And some of the angles they chose, I didn't understand what they actually, I didn't even know what the drawing was showing, to be honest. It was like, am I supposed to look at this sideways or something? Like, I'm not getting what this is. So it was a very frustrating experience for me. And Karen mentioned the misogyny aspect of it, but I was just looking at it from a lot of these female characters, especially the non-superhero ones. None of them passed the Bechdel test at all.
Nope, Bechdel, nope.
So that was bad. And I just couldn't get into the flow of the story. So because of that, I didn't enjoy it that much. And I'm curious to hear what parts of the story were controversial, because was it the women thing, or was it the memory thing? Or...
Yeah, there's a thing in storytelling, but it started in the comics calling fridging.
Yes.
As in, putting someone in a refrigerator.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of this comic is guilty of that. There, Sue Dibney, who was the victim in this case, she was used as literally a plot device, just something that caused all the strife and started off this whole thing. And I think, honestly, the main character is the JLA in general, because this did start an offshoot of titles. And if you know that ahead of time, which I didn't tell you, that it kind of splintered the JLA and then solidified them again, that's kind of where they were heading with this.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway.
Well, that's one of the problems with comic books, I find, is that the stories tend to really lean heavily on the fact that you know and love these characters, so that you're going into the story already engaged on a certain level. But if you're somebody that's coming into it that hasn't been with it for a while, or have stepped back, those connections aren't there. So you have that fundamental hurdle right off the bat. So
right. And I'll let you know right now, I knew you had an issue with comics. I thought this was an important thing to talk about. And also, I love hearing opinions of someone who's coming at it from almost an adversarial point of view. I love seeing what you took out of it, even though you're not a fan.
Adversarial is a little strong.
Well, you know what I mean, though.
Yeah.
You don't like comics.
No, that's not
So
true. I like comics. I just find that the form has limited in certain ways that doesn't work for me nearly as well now that I'm older. When I was younger, I
okay,
was into them.
okay,
But
good.
comics were a lot simpler back then. Like when I
Yeah,
read Spider-Man and that, I wasn't having any trouble following the story or reading the speech bubbles or the thought bubbles. But now it's all like I think they're just trying to do new things for the sake of doing new things rather than saying, is this serving the story? And a lot of times I don't think it is. So, but
right.
that's just maybe my adult perspective
No,
versus
that's
my
good.
youth perspective.
That's good. And again, I think that part of our listeners will be siding with you in this case, that they understand that, and it's gotten even, I don't want to say worse, but it's more intensive on the trying to be artsy side of where you put the dialogue and things like that. So, okay. How about you, Jesse? You're muted.
I am a massive Brad Meltzer fan. I found him because Kevin Smith was writing Green Arrow back in the day. And when Kevin Smith was going to leave, they announced that this writer, Brad Meltzer, was going to be taking over the book. I had never heard of him. So I ended up going and looking at some of his novels. The 10th Justice was his first novel, and he names the Supreme Court justices after characters in Watchmen. That's how big of a geek he is. And I have been lucky enough to meet Brad multiple times at book signings, and he always remembers me, and we always have a good time. And so I adore the man, and I recommend his I Am books to anyone who wants to see real heroes. So I went into this book, I'm biased because I like his writing. I also am a 60-year-old white guy. I will be 64 in June. So I can only see things from my eyes. And so I don't see often things till people mention it to me. I see this as a murder mystery. I see this as, okay, a spouse died. The JLA reacts to it. We find out this secret that was huge. I'm very disturbed by the scene where, not to get into details, where they go, you hear what you want to hear, and they do a close-up on Superman, and the idea that Superman would to put a deaf ear to what the league has done because of this. I love the idea of how far will you go to protect your loved ones? What is a secret identity for, and that storyline, and then the person we find out who is the villain is not who you expect. So love the story. I totally agree with Lou, but I like the art, and I like that the different styles. This is not a 6-panel and everything is normal. They have a lot of fun with it. Then when you come back, you can't unsee things. So then when someone who has a different set of eyes says, okay, so the villain is a female, and the victim is a female, ends up dying a horrible way. The victim is the villain is a female doing it just to get her man back. Then you go, oh crap, this is horrible. Right?
And those are essentially the only real female characters in this book,
right. Except Santana.
Zatanna, yeah.
Yeah.
Again,
and I'm a huge Santana fan, so
me
I was glad to
too.
see her. Yeah.
Yeah, big
Yes.
time.
So then when I reread this, I still can enjoy the story. I also read this time with Lou has no idea who this is. Lou
Yep.
is going to be confused as hell. Why is Hal Jordan not Green Lantern and is the Spectre, because at this point in the time he was, and all the different, and like Tim Drake, was Tim Drake a Robin? Wait a minute, I thought,
No,
you know,
those I knew. I didn't know that
okay,
Hal Jordan had become the Spectre, though. I think I might have heard that, but because
okay,
I knew who the current Flash and Green
okay,
Jordan. I know that there's been like 5 Flashes and
yeah,
5 Green Lanterns, and that throw the primary characters didn't throw me off. It was a lot of the secondary characters. And there's
mhm,
one panel where one character, I swear, he's wearing a Punisher uniform. I'm going, this is DC. This isn't Marvel. Like, why has this guy got a skull?
Deathstroke, you mean?
Is that what that is? He looked like the
Yeah.
Punisher. Like, I going, is this a Easter egg, or
mhm,
why isn't Marvel raising a flag and saying, "Hey, you're stealing one of our characters"? So yeah,
yeah,
stuff like that was throwing me off. But
mhm,
no, most of the main characters I knew. It was the secondary characters and down. I was lost on a lot of them. I had no
yeah,
And I
idea who they
honestly
were.
don't think that impinges on the story. If you just kind of wave them away,
yeah,
the story is still there,
mhm,
because it does have to do with the main characters. We did get, a bunch of other people I mean, a lot of other people in this. But again, our main and Black Canary, let's not leave out Wonder Woman and Black Canary, but they were literally standing around. I mean, essentially that was their whole thing.
yeah,
And it hurt me that Wonder Woman didn't have a bigger part in this, because she, like Superman, has a conscience, and what's right is right and what's wrong is wrong.
mhm,
She's not quite the Boy Scout that Superman is.
yeah,
The part that is really the thing that you take away is that Sadana and the other characters that were left after Batman and Superman walked out, when they mind wiped Dr. Light, that whole storyline is the thing. It's the thing that splinters everything. They violated Batman. I mean, how interesting is that to think about, that Batman knows there's something missing. There's something he doesn't have again, and his whole thing is being a detective and, narrowing down things, getting to the heart of it. And he's frustrated that there's this missing part. And the fact that Superman turned his back on it, that's out of character for him as well. So I think he felt like it was something that needed to be done, but he didn't want to be there for it. And it shows this different side,
yeah,
to those characters. Even Green Lantern, who is very much a gray character. I mean, he's got, not Green Lantern, Green Arrow, sorry. He's got green in his name, but he's very gray.
yeah,
He does some very questionable things at times. And when he is the narrator in this story, you can tell he was conflicted about it. And that's saying something. When the Green Lantern is conflicted about something, it's either bad or super good. And we did get some interesting characters. We got a conclusion to Jack Drake and Tim Drake, where they make Tim into a Batman. He lost his father. And I think the people that surround Batman tend to be, they tend to be kindred spirits. And so Batman comforting him I felt it was very emotional. He knows where he's coming from. We got some interesting villains. We got Deathstroke. We got Calculator. We got a lot. And Dr. Light, who is like one of the worst. He was a sidelined villain that just came up every once in a while. And to make him into this just loathsome person, his mind was wiped, but you can tell in that one panel, he remembers what he did and he smiles. So there's a lot of like nuances that you take with you from this comic into other things. Batman is now kind of alienated. Superman has set himself apart. The rest of these characters feel guilty for what they've done, which makes them kind of disenfranchised. And, going forward, back then you wonder what's going to happen. And again, I completely understand that there are, one of the things I said as a caveat, there are characters that you're not going to know in this book. You're not going to be familiar with. Just ignore them. And that is not a good sign usually, that you can just ignore characters. I did think that the more important parts of the story were actually important. I mean, knowing that Batman was violated like this, that Superman is different than how he appears. That, to me, those were the interesting parts of the story.
Mhm.
And then, this came out in what, 8 issues or 6 issues. I didn't read it all at once. It was, I read it in 6 issues, and getting to that final episode issue where Jean Loring turned out to be this horrible, I mean, you learn that there are flaws with her, but then you don't expect her to be this crazy person.
Right.
And that was mind-blowing at the time, that you had no idea who it was, that there was this huge twist. And reading it now, of course, it's not a huge twist for me. I know who it is right at the beginning. But back then it was a big deal to learn that it's not a supervillain. It's just this chick that, she stole her husband's suit. Okay. What do you need? What do you want to? Sure.
Jean Loring character, she was established in previous comics?
Yes.
So does her arc in this comic series make sense to you? Based on what you know of the character?
She wasn't a big character. She was just the wife of the Atom, essentially.
Okay.
She had some interaction, but she was literally like a side character. And they were divorced, so she hadn't been in anything for a long time. I didn't have any preconceived notions about her.
Okay. I was just wondering if it was out of character, because I've assumed she would have, as a wife of the Atom, that she might have had some episode or issues where she was.
Yeah, she did, but she wasn't a feature or anything.
Okay.
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to be overly generic, right? But there was a lot of the Lois Lane characters in the Superman, in the different comic books where it's the girlfriend and what she is, and where and they don't know sometimes what to do with them. So it is established, the elongated man, that in whatever backups, he's never had his own book, but he's always been a guest star or like backup stories, that they're very happily married, and they're very strong. And so that's why it was very upsetting to see her being killed. And then, so yeah, I think that would my answer. I like the mystery, and it was, as a reader, it almost is taking this to a mature level of, we all joke about, oh, look, I don't have my glasses on. I have my glasses on. You can't tell who I am. And the whole secret, the secret identity, and that where the villains know who they are, and the rape of a character in the book is very unsettling. And the idea of, would our heroes push hero behavior to protect their family, or would they draw a line? And I liked that. I'll go back to one of the things that really turned me off of reading some comic books this is way back, where this was during the Secret Wars, where Peter Parker had a steno book that was pure gold, and the whole issue was him debating on is it right to sell that to pay for Aunt May's medical bills? And I went, that is a dumb question. I mean, that's just, of course you do. You
Right.
sell
The
it.
answer is yes.
Yeah, the
Yes.
answer is yes. And he ends up not doing it because he thinks it's, it's not moral. And I'm like, okay, that's just dumb.
Right.
No, I mean,
Yeah, too good.
yeah, too
Superheroes
good.
that are too good.
And
Yes.
so I like the idea that they are willing to do the hard things. And it does give you a mature storyline.
How about you, Lou? You have any comments on that? And I will tell you right up front, Sue Dibney was a big part of the Elongated Man.
Yeah.
She
no pun intended.
Right.
Yes, exactly.
She
Sorry.
No, that's okay. She was a big part in his, and again, like you said, he didn't really have his own comic, but where he was, Sue Dibney was there too. She
Yeah.
was a big part of his life.
And if I had any connections to her as a character, then that, her death obviously would have meant something to me, but I didn't have that connection. So it was just like, okay, so this superhero that seems like a grade B version of Plastic Man or Elastic Man or Mr. Fantastic, I'm supposed to care about this character.
Yeah.
So I get that the structure or the at least my understanding of the story was what you were mentioning about. It's not really about the characters, it's about the Justice League as an entity, and they were trying to use they had to use the lesser characters, because if it was just Batman and Superman, they would have just walked through this story pretty quickly and solved it. But it was just a chance for them to flesh out these lesser characters. And one of the big debates going on nowadays is Batman, does he kill or doesn't he? And this story is a sub flavor of that type of story about how far would these characters go to protect their loved ones. And that, I think the story would have worked better if they would have concentrated on one or two characters for that storyline. Like, it should have been Elongated Man's story if that's the story they wanted to tell, but they got all these other characters into it, and they brought all this other baggage into the story, which just clouded the central conceit of the story for me. So and it's hard to get emotionally attached to a concept or an organization as opposed to a character. So I was never really emotionally engaged in the story from any perspective. And I was just watching and waiting for Batman and Superman to step up. And that's the problem when you've got such strong A characters like these characters. That's DC's general problem, I think, in adapting their material to the movies, is that you've got these 6 characters that are basically gods, and they can solve any problem rather quickly. And then you've got all these lower tier characters that should be more relatable to us, but they're just not as cool. So you're just not into them as much. And I feel like I'm rambling now, but it's I couldn't get behind the story because I didn't know whose journey I was supposed to be following in this story, because it kept jumping around, as I mentioned earlier. And there were certain sequences where I was just like shaking my head, like the Superman Ma Kent scenes just seemed really like what the hell are they doing to Superman? He's looking like a real dweeb in these scenes. Like, I get the fact that he's respectful of his parents and that, but they carried it to like the nth degree. I thought it was just a little too much. And then there was certain action sequences like that, the one with Bullseye, when he puts down all these characters. I thought they were dead. Like, he put a sword right through Flash, and it's not, it's not even debatable, because you see the drawing, the sword is right through his body, and yet 4 panels later they're all back up on their feet again. I'm going, seriously? Like, you want me to believe this moment is really happening? And he was almost on the verge of stealing Green Lantern's ring, and I just didn't buy that scene at all. I just thought this is a cheat. Basically, it's just like I felt like Annie Wilkes in Misery. He didn't go over the Cockadoodie Cliff. Well, this guy got run through with a sword. You just don't get up from something like that. Maybe he vibrated his innards and healed himself. I don't know, but now I'm getting down into the nitpicky territory. So, you know, it's just not a story that an outsider can walk into unless you've got, you know, a good background of comic book reading for you. So, and the things that maybe have been controversial back then, like if you watch The Boys or something like that, this stuff is Sunday school stuff compared to that. So, yeah, I'm just coming at this at a wrong time and place to really appreciate the impact that apparently that you both have with it.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that.
No, that's I feel bad for.
No,
I don't want to step on something that you like. Nobody likes.
No. I like hearing your opinion on it. That, you know, that's come again, like our Babylon 5 stuff.
Mm-hmm.
You're coming from a different perspective, and I do appreciate that. You know, I like seeing what people think, and I think even Jesse and I have differing opinions about it. I love Brad Meltzer. Sorry. I love his stuff. But I do think that this was not one of his best stories. I think that he had a guideline of what he had to do. You know, he had to get to a certain place. And that's what DC was all about back then. They had everything mapped out. And it was, you know, a year down the road, they needed these heroes to be doing something. So they needed to set up why they would be splintered. I mean, in 52, and this isn't a spoiler or anything, Wonder Woman kills someone, like right away, just snaps his neck in front of a bunch of other people, Maxwell Lord. After Maxwell Lord has killed a bunch of people, I mean, he's a bad guy, but that's out of character for Wonder Woman. But, you know, it goes back to like stories like this that started that kind of gray morality. You know, what would you do if people knew your identity, if people were coming after your family, if there was a chance that another member of the JLA would rat you out like Batman? You know, that I think that's where the nuances come in. And I do agree with you. It's probably unfair of me to pick this because you're coming into it from, I don't know any of these people, so I can't care about them. And I 100% understand that. This is you coming in to the middle of something. I kind of wanted to see if the JLA component would be interesting to you. And it sounds like there was some stuff, but maybe not.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that is, I think, interesting is if you read some information, like Brad was wanting to explain why Dr. Light was so goofy and almost a joking villain in early Teen Titan books, you know, back when Nick Carty was writing it and everything. And so that's his point, was to say, hey, this person is why this is to explain that is his mind got changed. But as I said earlier, once you see that, once you see what he's saying, I can't unsee it. And now then I understand, well, gosh, that is the only two strong women characters are the victim and the killer.
And the mind wiper.
And the mind wiper. Yeah. And the idea that they wiped Batman's mind, right? Like, this is crazy. You can't do that to Batman. Batman is his mind. That is all about him. That's his true superpower, that and money, right? Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it is. I thought it was a very interesting take on a story. I enjoyed it. I'm like you. I read it every episode at a time. I was really surprised that who ended up being the killer. I did remember that scene where you see the little bitty
Feet.
footprints and you're
Hmm.
going, oh shit, is it the Atom? And then when you find out it's his ex-wife, it's a big reveal. Um, and I think they were just talking about, was it Alfred Hitchcock who talked about the icebox moment, where he says that you go to the cinema, you watch a film, you enjoy it, and then you get up in the middle of the night to the icebox to get a glass of water or a piece of pie, and you go, hey, wait a minute, that scene didn't work, right? So
Right.
so I think this is, I think absolutely is, with you coming in from a fresh eyes like Lou is, you go, well, these things don't work. Similar to like Babylon 5, there's episodes where we talk about where, because I know the whole story, you both will go, well, I don't know if this really works. And I think it's not fair. And I always don't like when someone says, well, you just have to watch the whole series. No, no, no. I think individual episodes and individual stories have to be to stand on their own, or especially if you're doing serialized either writing or TV.
Right.
Yeah, I don't think that's a black and white issue. It depends on the format. Comic books have a big problem with that because it is serialized, but it's also interconnected, so that you've got like this metaverse thing going on at the same time. Whereas in, like in Farscape or Babylon 5 or any sort of Fringe or any serialized show that you watch, there's an implicit understanding that I have to have been keeping up to date with the series going into this episode so that I will get the full value of this story. And that's fine as long as you know that going in ahead of time. But if somebody picked up this comic book and hadn't read a comic book before, yeah, you're going to be lost. And I mean, I've read comic books and I've seen all the movies, so I'm still fairly familiar with all the characters, but I still had a hard time following what was going on, not just because of the characters, but as I mentioned, the formatting of the story, of the panels and the balloons and that. Another thing that Karen mentioned earlier that I want to mention for I think what's problematic for comic books too, or is a big issue that comic books face that other forms of literature don't, is they have to put out so much content all the time that the amount of ideas that they have to generate to feed that is, I can't think of another genre that has that issue. And it's a blessing and a curse because you can do all different types of stories and what ifs and alternate universes and multiverses and secret wars. But at the same time, you often, and I think this has gotten more true once they got past the golden age of comics, is you have to come up with more and more outlandish comic book stories to keep feeding the pipeline. And I think we all know that comic books have made storylines that people didn't like. The one that I can think of that most recently that created the most furor was that Captain America was secretly a Russian spy. Like, that is just not a storyline that's going to fly with fans. Like, you can't for 50, 70 years have this, true blue, red, white, and blue American apple pie guy. And guess what? He's a Russian spy. Like, that's an interesting thought exercise, but it's not a good story to print. If you're being honest to your audience. And I think comic book stories run into this problem quite a bit. And a lot of times they dodge it by saying it's a what if story or whatever. But I do think it's a problem that comic books face that other forms of literature don't. So there's that as well. And as I mentioned, like, the big problem here is that, especially for DC, whose characters are much more elevated, they're gods. So it's really hard to write stories where they themselves are in danger. You basically have to resort to making it their loved ones or friends or teammates or whatever. Whereas in Marvel, the characters are more grounded, generally more relatable. though in the last couple of phases, we're getting into the more super powered characters, which I think is why phase 4 for Marvel hasn't worked as well as the previous phases, because these characters, like the Eternals, are not a relatable group of characters to me. Everybody can relate to Spider-Man, your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, but relating to Thor, the only way he really worked is once they started to make him a comedic character. When he played it straight and serious, that wasn't working as well, right? So you have to come up with these gimmicks to make it work, which is why Superman is the most problematic character for DC to adapt to film, because how do you make that character relatable when there's nothing that can hurt him? I mean, that takes away so many writers' tools that you have to come up with these really crazy scenarios for those movies to work. So
yeah, I think that's why Superman has never been one of my favorite characters. He is all good.
Right. Well, there's a basic attraction as a kid. You want to, like, who doesn't want to fly? But
sure,
that only lasts as a kid. Like once you get past that and you want to get into stories about characters facing struggles in that, Superman is an extremely difficult character to put in those kind of situations.
And
agreed.
He's my favorite character, and I think a good Superman story is him having to figure out how to do the right thing, even though things are pushing against him to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And so I think when it's really well done, it is very strong. And so there is the ability to do that. I do think that's where people run into is writers go, well, he's just so powerful. I've got to figure out something else for him to fight against. And I think you can do this mentally and with his morals, I think makes for an interesting story. One of the cliches, and it's not a cliche, but it is a statement. Every comic book is someone's first comic book. I say that all the time when people complain about Bruce Springsteen, take a drink, is why is he doing Dancing in the Dark? We do not need to hear him do Dancing in the Dark again. We don't need to hear Badlands, and we don't need to hear Born to Run. And I go, someone in that arena, in that venue, has never seen Bruce Springsteen perform live. And if they walk in there and if he doesn't do Born to Run, they are going to be disappointed. So how do you do that? My buddy Tom always talks about that, where he makes a point in the dialogue where he will say, well, Karen, and well, Lou, and he also says, and you never can say, well, Karen, as you know, because then there's no reason to say that, right? I do think there is it turns out to be a very controversial choice. If you read the critics, a lot of people think this is one of the worst comic book stories of all times. That for all the reasons that we are discussing, that the characters don't make sense, the JLA infighting, the use of the two women characters, this everything. I think it's an interesting story, and as I keep saying, I can't unsee stuff now, but I can go back to, I'm going to forgive this part of it just to enjoy the story that they're telling. And I think it's what do you get the man who has everything, right? Which is a famous story that Alan Moore wrote. One of my favorite Superman stories all the time. It would not be a good episode. We would not have a good episode discussing this. We would go, yep, that's a great story. Yep, it's a good story. Yeah, it's a good story. Okay, let's move on.
Yeah, and I feel like one of the things that made me pull this out is we're coming from 3 different perspectives. I'm a female. I see things from my perspective. And it hurt. I mean, to me, it was a great miniseries because of where it fell in time. But I was very frustrated not to see Wonder Woman kicking ass, to see Zatanna being used, to see the victim, she's killed right off the bat as a female. And then when it turned out to not be the Atom, it blew my mind at the end that it was Jean Loring. But, looking back at it, just after I read it, I was like, I'm so mad. Why weren't there more powerful women in this story? And I think you can see, talking about Brad Meltzer, I think you can see what parts of it were his thoughts and what parts of it were DC telling him you have to write this in. I really do think that. And I think it would have been a stronger story if he could have just written a 6-issue miniseries about these characters. Because I think he would have treated it differently. He wouldn't have had to look down the road. So coming at it, and again, the third perspective is just coming in fresh. I didn't see what happened afterwards. I have no idea where this fits in the DC mythology. And it's good to see that even, you think to yourself, well, it would work even if it doesn't, even if I don't know what came after. And it doesn't, apparently. It doesn't stand up. And there's a part of me that's very sentimental about this story. I read it when it was coming out. When you read it in the 6 installments, it feels like it's building to something. And, now it's kind of here it all is. I'm going to just set it on the table and let you read it. And I just think it's interesting to have these 3 perspectives.
Yeah, I agree. And the Brad's latest novel, The Escape Artist, does have a very strong female lead. And so I know he's able to do this. And you wonder if he was writing a different story now, would he have, because we all change as writers, would he change what he wanted to say and what to do? So yeah,
right.
Definitely. I mean, he could have written a story, dropped it off, and then gone back and written it all over again, and it would have been a different story even then. Like that always happens. Writers always want to tinker with what they're doing, so that for sure would happen. It's interesting. The 2005 is interesting because I do think like the awareness of genre or of gender and other races and that, I do think that was already there, but maybe I'm misremembering it, because if this story was released today, I think it would get trashed pretty hard, because of the various issues that we've already mentioned with it. So it's
you got to remember, this was before Me Too.
So I do
before
think
all this unrest that's been happening, and and it was also, we're getting to a point where the United States wasn't as tumultuous. It was 4 years after 9/11. So things were, a little more light. And like I said, before Me Too, before Black Lives Matter, it was definitely a different time. It was that kind of in the middle of all that was happening.
And that's definitely reflected in the story.
Definitely.
Yes,
I agree.
So
yeah,
it's, what I would have been really interested to see here is if they had basically kept out the big 6 totally out of the story. I think it would have been a better story. Of course, you do need Batman for one point, but that bringing him in at that moment would have been a big moment too, even bigger than how it plays out in this story when they do the memory wipe. So I think when you talked about Brad Meltzer had to hit certain points, and one of them was as well, you got to have the whole GLA in the story, and that's not that's a lot of characters to put into a story. So it's it's just an interesting construct and a difficult one to work with for sure. I don't envy him the task of what he had to try to bring this all together with so many characters. It's difficult for sure.
And
Um,
what could
yeah.
have been interesting too is if this had been set in the Astro City world, where
Okay.
I don't know if if you've read any of the Astro City, Lou.
No, no.
All right, so Kurt Busiek basically created a world where it is a different take on superheroes. He uses tropes but tell the stories. Like the very first story, the Samaritan, which is their superhero, um, the whole issue is him going and doing deeds, and he counts 7 seconds, 8 seconds, 12 seconds, and you don't know why. And at the end of the issue, spoilers for something over 20 years old, he says 3 minutes and 37 seconds today. That's pretty good. And when he goes to sleep, he dreams about flying because he never gets to fly just to enjoy, because he's always going to help something. So it's a very different take. So they have done different takes on it. So if you had these tropes where it wasn't Superman, it wasn't Batman, but these kind of tropes, it'd be an interesting take on, how far do you go to protect your identity and protect those you love?
Mhm.
Yeah, and I will say Astro City, some of the most beautiful covers in comic books.
Yeah.
Just amazing. They were done by Alex Ross.
Yeah.
And on that note, I want to also mention that the individual covers of Identity Crisis were done by, now I've forgotten his name, Michael
Turner, right?
Thank you. Yes. Michael Turner, who died just a few years later.
Yeah.
And I think his covers are gorgeous.
Yes.
They're kind of a cross between a cartoon and this really almost Alex Ross type, natural look. I think he had a very Michael Turner way of drawing and illustrating. I loved Michael Turner's art. The inside of the comic, I can see there were parts of it that you didn't like. I like Rag Morales's art, who does the stuff on the inside. But I can see where it's not everyone's cup of tea.
Yeah.
I do think that the covers were, if you like comics, they're beautiful. So yeah, I mean, as far as the artwork goes and the penciling goes, and also one of the things I'll point out to you, Lou, is I'm coming from my first comic book as an adult was Sandman, which is 100 times more confusing when you're reading it than this. Every character has their own font. So it doesn't matter where it goes on the page, you know who's talking. But to someone coming in fresh, how do you know who's talking?
Exactly.
So this was an easy read for me because I was conditioned already. Like 20 years before this is when Sandman came out. So again, it's another perspective of, I love the confusion of, not knowing where it goes. And I think that's part of the story is kind of, and it might just be me being weird about it, but I feel like the way that he writes where everything goes is kind of the point of it. But coming from I want to read it and I'm not used to reading this sort of thing, it's frustrating. So I don't know. Does that make sense at all?
Mm-hmm.
Am I made? Okay.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
So probably not the greatest pick ever, but I really did want to see you guys' take on it because I have very mixed feelings about it and I wanted to see what other people thought. And it's one of those things that you're like, I wish I could talk to someone about this. And this was my way of kind of, hey, let's talk about something that I would love to, you watch a show and you're thinking, who can I talk to about this?
Absolutely.
And so I think this was one of my little, I don't know, selfish ways to talk about something.
Oh no.
Well, I love
cool.
it. It was
Yeah.
fun. It was a different change of pace. So
I just didn't want to be the Grinch. That's all.
No, you weren't the Grinch at all.
You weren't. And
No.
even if you were, I appreciate your take on it. I really do. I know that sounds trite, but I mean it. You're a very close friend of mine. And so to hear your take on it is very interesting to me. So
absolutely.
Okay. Well, you're welcome.
All right. So
awesome.
So I guess let's wrap it up here. Any final thoughts?
Nope. Nope. We're all good.
Okay, good. All right. Karen, if someone wants to reach you, how can they?
You can reach me at Aliveria on the Twitter machine and at my blog, which is alistuff.com.
All right. And Lou?
You can find me on YouTube at Lou's Reviews, where you'll find our reviews for Babylon 5, our one-off episodes like this one, JKL Media, as well as my writer and Stephen King podcast. And on Twitter, you can find me at Lou W. Sitzma or at S King Podcast.
And I am at Jesse Jackson DFW. You can hear me talk Bruce Springsteen on Set Listing Bruce. And I guess I'm going to have to buy the latest Springsteen the Stephen King novel, so I can join in the fun. Right? He's got a new one coming out, and I want to. We had so much fun last time.
Well, you've got till September, so
yeah. Okay, we got some time.
Yeah.
All right, listeners, let us know what you're thinking. We appreciate it. We will be back with another one-off. So for now, stay safe, be kind. We'll talk to you soon. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye. And scene.
The proceeding has been a JKL Media production.